The insurance recertification packet felt too stiff in my hands, the crisp edges biting into my thumb as I stared at a signature line that demanded a lie. My oldest son slapped his copy of the document down on the polished mahogany table of the Willow Ridge conference room. The air smelled of sharp lemon cleaner and nervous sweat. At 69 years old, a retired fire captain from Columbus, I spent 30 years pulling people out of burning buildings. But sitting across from my 3 adult children, I had never felt more trapped. "We just need one signature, Dad," Colleen said, her voice carrying that high, tight pitch she used when she wanted to pretend everything was fine. Behind her, Ryan stared at the carpet. My youngest son kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets, shifting his weight from side to side like a man waiting for a sentence to be handed down. 3 weeks ago, when I could barely get out of bed, every single one of them told me they were too broke and too busy to help. Now, they had driven across the state to find me, and it was not because they missed their father. They came because the document in my hands proved they had been receiving monthly payments to care for me for the last 8 months. I placed my own thick manila folder onto the table right beside their unsigned form. Before I tell you what I kept inside that folder, you need to understand why I stopped answering my own children in the first place. It started 4 weeks earlier. I had been fighting a severe respiratory infection for days, complicated by a bad reaction to my new blood pressure medication. My legs shook just trying to stand up, and my chest burned with every shallow breath. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand, misjudged the distance, and knocked it over. The cold water soaked into the rug against my bare feet. I could not bend down safely to clean it up. The house was dead quiet, except for the low hum of the furnace and a blinking voicemail light from the pharmacy. Dialing Derek took effort. Asking for financial handouts was never my style, so I only requested a ride to the doctor and some help picking up my prescriptions. "My quarterly numbers are terrible right now, Dad," Derek said over the phone. I could hear the rapid clicking of his office keyboard in the background. "I really cannot miss a day of work. You know private caregivers are expensive, right?" I had not asked for a private caregiver, but I let the comment go and hung up. Next, I called my daughter. Colleen worked as a scheduling supervisor at an outpatient medical center, so she understood health issues better than anyone in the family. "I do not have any paid time off left," she told me, sighing heavily into the receiver. "Plus, we have those hospital bills from the kids. I will check on you when things calm down." Finally, I called Ryan. He told me that gas prices, rent, and child support had completely emptied him out. He offered to order soup for me through a delivery app, but the food never arrived. Every refusal sounded completely plausible on its own, yet the sting came from the accumulation of them. I was not asking my children to pay my mortgage or fix my roof. I just needed one of them to show up. Later that afternoon, the living room spun while I tried to navigate my way to the kitchen. My neighbor, Loretta, found me sitting on the hallway floor and immediately called an ambulance. The emergency room doctor treated me for dehydration and the severe medication interaction, and the hospital admitted me for observation. The next morning, the room smelled of iodine and bleached cotton. A hospital social worker named Tasha came to my bedside with a clipboard. She reviewed my discharge plan, tapping her pen against the plastic clip while the heart monitor beeped a steady rhythm behind me. "Mr. Delaney, how many hours does Derek usually stay with you each day?" she asked, looking over her reading glasses. "And will Colleen be able to resume your medication supervision when you go home?" I stared at her. The intravenous line in the back of my hand tugged painfully as I shifted against the mattress. I assumed she had mixed up my chart with another patient on the floor. Tasha walked over to the corner printer, pulled a fresh sheet of paper, and handed it to me. It was a benefit summary printed directly from my medical records. The header displayed the name of the private long-term care insurance carrier my late wife Elaine and I had purchased years ago. We had paid those premiums faithfully, skipping vacations just to ensure we would never become a financial burden to our kids. I scanned the page and a cold weight settled in my stomach. The policy included a family care rider. Derek was listed as the official care coordinator. According to the document, I had been receiving paid family care for 8 straight months. I recognized the policy immediately. About 10 months ago, after a bad fall, I had signed an initial claim packet. Derek had brought the polished folder to my house, explaining that we were just opening the claim in case I needed help later on. My signature on that original form was completely real, but everything that happened after that was not. The statement listed daily meal preparation, transportation, and medication monitoring during weeks when I lived completely alone. My eyes caught a specific date, claiming Derek had provided 6 hours of in-home care. I remembered that exact Thursday because my oldest son had posted photos of himself attending a banking conference in Las Vegas. A few lines down, Colleen had certified that she drove me to a medical appointment on a day I had driven myself in my own truck. Tasha watched my face carefully. "Are these records accurate?" she asked softly. My first instinct, built from decades of being a father, was to protect my kids and say yes. Then, I looked down at the plastic hospital bracelet fastened tightly around my frail wrist. I remembered the cold water soaking my bare feet, while my children told me they were too poor to help. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "None of that happened." Tasha frowned and set her clipboard on the mattress. She explained that the insurance company would likely need to verify every single reported service, especially since my health status had recently changed. Then she pointed her pen toward the top right corner of the printed benefit statement. "You should also know," Tasha said, "all official correspondence is going to this address." I looked at the printed street name and zip code. It was not my house. It was Derek's house. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. The reason I had never seen a single statement over the last 8 months was simple. Someone had made sure the truth never reached my mailbox. Tasha left the room, closing the heavy wooden door behind her with a soft click. Dialing the toll-free number on the benefit statement took 3 tries with my shaking fingers. A customer service representative answered after a long hold, her voice cheerful and entirely out of place for the conversation I was about to have. Requesting a complete copy of my claim records felt like crossing a line. The woman hesitated, her keyboard clicking rapidly over the phone, and explained that Derek Delaney was listed as the primary administrative contact. Reminding her that I owned the policy took a sharper tone than I normally used. I ordered her to freeze all online access and route every piece of paper directly to my hospital room. My chest tightened as she read the confirmation number aloud. Protecting my own medical file from my oldest son felt like sliding a deadbolt against my own blood. The courier arrived the next morning with a sealed envelope thicker than a phone directory. Tearing the cardboard open, I smelled the sharp, metallic scent of fresh printer ink. I spread the printed logs across my blanket, arranging them chronologically. The earliest pages hurt the most, because they contain the truth. 10 months ago, right after a nasty fall on my back porch, Colleen really did drive me to 2 specialist appointments. Derek stayed overnight twice when the pain medication made me too dizzy to stand. Ryan brought over 3 heavy bags of groceries and unpacked them into the pantry. We had submitted a legitimate claim together. Seeing those real acts of kindness documented next to the approved daily benefit amount made the rest of the pile infinitely heavier. The betrayal did not start as a grand theft. It started right next to something generous. By the 2nd month, the claimed hours doubled. By the 4th month, the logs painted a picture of a helpless old man. The records described daily medication supervision, meal preparation, and bathing assistance. I ran my index finger over those specific weeks. During that exact time, I had been driving my truck to the hardware store, attending Sunday church services, and volunteering twice a week at the Columbus Fire Museum. The caregiver notes did not even sound like my life. The language repeated across different days, using the exact same sterile phrases. It read like a corporate template, not a family helping their father. I pulled my pocket calendar from my overnight bag and cross-checked the dates. One entry claimed Derek provided 6 hours of standby assistance on a Tuesday in October. Tracing the date in my small leather planner, I found the truth. That Tuesday marked the anniversary of Elaine passing away. I had spent that entire afternoon sitting alone at the cemetery, talking to a marble headstone. Another entry stated Ryan cooked dinner and monitored my safety on a Friday evening. Pulling up my text messages, I scrolled back through the history. On that very Friday, my youngest son had been texting me complaints from a layover at the Atlanta airport after missing his connecting flight. Needing a clear head, I called Nathan Cole. The attorney handled Elaine's probate years ago, and he never wasted words with false sympathy. I explained the single sheet of paper Tasha had given me, the impossible hours, and the unauthorized address change. The line stayed quiet for a long time. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic outside his office window. "I do not want to jump to conclusions," Nathan said carefully. "We need to preserve every document before we assume anyone intentionally committed fraud. I need you to answer 3 questions for me. Do you know who controls the actual bank account receiving these funds? Do you know who controls the actual bank account receiving these funds?" "Derek," I replied, staring at the ceiling tiles. "Do you know who receives the actual distributions from that account?" "No." "And who benefits if you sign the next recertification form?" The silence stretched between us. Sitting in the hospital bed, I realized how blind I had been. Nathan instructed me to keep quiet, save every piece of paper, and let his office secure the legal records before I confronted a single member of my family. My phone vibrated violently against the plastic tray table an hour later. Derek's name flashed across the digital screen. Picking up the device felt like lifting a cinder block, but I answered, forcing my breathing to stay perfectly even. "Dad," my oldest son said, sounding breathless. "I just heard they admitted you. What did the doctors say?" Before I could form a sentence, he kept talking. "Did some insurance people come by your room? Someone from the hospital billing department called me about the policy." His second sentence gave him away completely. The order of his panic was crystal clear, because the insurance policy came before the diagnosis. He needed to know what the hospital had uncovered before he cared about what the infection was doing to my lungs. Squeezing the thin cotton blanket in my fist, I swallowed the bitter taste in the back of my throat. I told him the medication made me exhausted, promised to call him tomorrow, and hung up. I dialed the insurance carrier back, waiting through the automated menus until a supervisor came on the line. After verifying my identity again, I gave the final order. I told them to suspend all benefit payments immediately, pending a full review of the current care arrangement. The supervisor noted the request, adding that a routine recertification packet was already scheduled to mail in 30 days. Stopping the money early would force whoever built this lie to step out of the shadows. Later that evening, the nurses brought a bland dinner tray, and Nathan called back to check on my discharge plan. "The hospital wants to release me in 2 days, I told him, pushing the untouched food away. "I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed." The lawyer paused, and the hesitation in his breath caught my attention. "Frank, you need to think about this," Nathan said quietly. "Derek still has a key to your front door. He has online access to your utilities, your pharmacy records, and the mailing address for this policy." I stared at the blank white wall opposite my bed, the reality of my situation finally crashing over me. Going back to my house meant returning to the absolute center of my son's control. The hospital discharge coordinator arrived the next morning with a thick stack of paperwork. Tasha stood at the foot of my bed, her pen clicking a steady rhythm while she waited for me to name a family member who would take me home. The smell of institutional bleach and stale breakfast oatmeal hung heavy in the air. When I told her that I would not be listing Derek, Colleen, or Ryan as my emergency contacts, her pen stopped moving. Tasha suggested setting up short-term home support, but that required giving an agency access to my front door. I refused. Letting anyone into my house meant leaving a window open for my children to step back into my medical decisions. Seeing my stubbornness, she pulled a glossy brochure from her clipboard and handed it to me. The cover displayed a sprawling property called Willow Ridge, a continuing care community with independent living apartments on the edge of town. My chest tightened at the sight of it. The words retirement home sounded exactly like surrender, and I had spent 30 years fighting fires precisely because I hated giving up. I pushed the brochure back across the blanket. Tasha did not push it back. She simply leaned against the window frame and told me I was looking at it the wrong way. She explained that I was not giving up my freedom, but rather buying my own privacy. That single sentence changed everything, because privacy was the one thing my children had quietly stolen from me. We drove to Willow Ridge that afternoon to tour a recently vacated, independent living resale apartment. Because the previous resident had already moved out, the community allowed me to occupy the unit temporarily while my financial review, entrance paperwork, and final contract were completed over the following couple of weeks. Nathan Cole met me in the main lobby, standing beside a licensed geriatric care manager named Marisol Vega. Marisol worked independently of the facility, and she spoke with the kind of calm authority I respected. She led us down a quiet, carpeted hallway to look at a respite apartment that had just become available. The space was compact and painted a dull beige. It lacked the warmth of the home Elaine and I had built, but it had a balcony overlooking a garden, a medical call system, and a small kitchenette. We walked down to the community dining room, and I noticed the residents choosing their own schedules and moving freely. An older woman with silver hair stopped by our table to say hello. She introduced herself as a retired school teacher, and she must have noticed the hesitation in my posture. She poured herself a cup of coffee, leaned close, and told me she bought her apartment 3 years ago, just so her kids could never make the decision for her. Her honesty anchored my choice. We returned to the beige apartment, and I sat down at the small dining table with Nathan and Marisol to look at the numbers. Buying into an independent living community felt financially terrifying at first. I am not a wealthy man, but my late wife and I always lived far below our means. Nathan opened his leather briefcase and spread my financial summaries across the table. He confirmed that a temporary bridge loan secured against my mortgage-free house would easily cover the community entrance fee. I did not have to sell my family home immediately, and the life care contract included a clear cancellation window if I changed my mind. I was not spending my life savings on a whim. I was using the safety net Elaine and I had woven over 40 years to protect myself from the people we had raised. The next 2 hours felt like burying a piece of my own family. With Marisol sitting beside me, I signed the documents to change my emergency contacts, update my mailing addresses, and reset every account password. I officially revoked Derek from his role as the administrative contact on my long-term care policy. A separate form stripped Colleen of her informal access to my medical scheduling. We established a firm boundary, making Nathan the single point of legal and medical contact for my entire life. Before I could settle into Willow Ridge, I needed to gather a few things. My neighbor Loretta met me at my old house, helping me navigate the front steps while my legs still felt unsteady. The living room smelled exactly the way I had left it, a mixture of old wood and lemon polish, and the silence inside felt heavy. I left most of my possessions behind. Loretta helped me pack a small suitcase with clothes, my heavy firehouse coffee mug, and a framed photograph of Elaine. My hands shook as I picked up the wooden recipe box from the kitchen counter. That box held Elaine's handwriting, and I refused to leave it in a house that no longer felt safe. Standing on the front porch, I locked the deadbolt and stared at the brass key in my palm. Derek still carried a copy of that key on his own ring. I turned to Nathan, and the lawyer nodded before I could even ask the question. He promised to have a locksmith change every lock on the property the minute we pulled out of the driveway. I arrived back at Willow Ridge as the sun started to set. I told absolutely no one in my family where I was going. Nathan sent a short, formal message to all 3 of my children on my behalf. The text simply stated that I was safe, recovering in a private location, and completely unavailable for visits. Sitting alone in the quiet apartment, I waited for the inevitable explosion. My cell phone lit up on the kitchen counter 10 minutes later. Derek called 11 times in a row, leaving no voicemails. Colleen sent 3 long text messages, disguised as deep medical concern, asking about my blood pressure and demanding to speak to my doctors. Ryan sent a single message asking if I was angry at them. I sat in the dark and did not answer a single one. Hearing the faint sound of laughter coming from the resident common room down the hall, I finally let out a long breath. Then, a secure notification chimed on my tablet. The insurance company had processed my urgent request, sending an official confirmation that the next massive benefit payment had been placed on an absolute hold. 2 minutes after that email arrived, Derek called again. This time, my oldest son left a voicemail. I pressed the speaker button, and his panicked voice filled my new kitchen. He did not ask if my lungs were healing, and he did not ask if I was safe. "Dad, you froze the wrong account," Derek said, his breath hitching into the microphone. "Call me before you create a problem none of us can fix." Listening to the message repeat, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Derek was not terrified that something terrible had happened to his father. He was terrified because I had finally interrupted the money. Valerie Sloan spoke with the careful, measured cadence of someone who investigated financial discrepancies for a living. The insurance investigator sat across from me in the small conference room at Willow Ridge, her laptop open next to Nathan Cole's leather briefcase. The morning sun filtered through the window blinds, casting thin shadows across the printed bank statements spread over the mahogany table. The suspended benefits were deposited into a designated care account, Valerie explained, sliding a paper toward my hands. Derek Delaney controlled it as your authorized care coordinator. I recognized the standard account creation form immediately. My signature sat at the bottom, signed on a Tuesday afternoon 10 months ago when I thought I was simply preparing for my future. I had willingly authorized the account, but I never saw a single monthly statement. All the paper mail had been legally redirected to Derek's house using the administrative access I gave him. "I need you to look at the distributions," Valerie said quietly. She arranged 3 separate columns of bank transfers on the table. The money did not sit in one central place. It had been systematically divided and transferred to 3 different checking accounts every single month. Seeing my children's names printed in bold ink next to those dollar amounts felt like taking a physical blow to the ribs. Derek received the largest portion by far, taking thousands of dollars a month to support his oversized suburban lifestyle and private school tuitions. Colleen received consistent, mid-sized payments. Her name on that paper hurt in an entirely different way, because she worked as a supervisor in a medical office. She knew exactly what those care codes meant and still took the cash. Then I looked at the third column. Ryan received smaller, irregular transfers. The youngest of my 3 kids always struggled to keep a steady job, and one specific transfer caught my eye. The date matched the exact week Ryan had called me crying, begging for help with his overdue rent and utility bills. I pointed to the line. The transaction memo simply read, "Dad, help." For a brief second, a small wave of relief washed over me. Ryan might have honestly believed the money came directly from my personal savings as a gift. He might not have known about the insurance scheme at all. But Valerie anticipated my thought. She tapped her pen on a transfer sent 4 months later. The memo on that transaction had changed. It no longer said, "Dad, help." It read, "Family Care Distribution." Ryan had seen that label. He knew the source of the funds had changed, and he kept taking the money anyway. My cell phone buzzed against the wooden table, vibrating violently against the wood grain. Colleen's name flashed on the digital screen. Nathan gave me a brief nod, signaling that I should answer, but keep my words incredibly measured. I pressed accept and put the phone on speaker. "Dad," Colleen said, her voice carrying that soft, practiced tone she used with nervous patients at her clinic. "Derek told me your new medication is making you confused. We are all so worried about you. Please let me speak to your doctors and get this sorted out." I looked down at the bank statement bearing her name. "Did you receive money from my long-term care policy, Colleen?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. 5 seconds passed, and then 10. I could hear her sharp intake of breath over the speaker. "That money was just reimbursing us," she finally stammered. The smooth authority she usually commanded at the clinic vanished completely. "For the things we did for you, the errands, and the emotional labor we put in." "What exactly did you do for me on the 12th of last month?" I asked, reading the date off Valerie's spreadsheet. "Your health is the only thing that matters right now," Colleen deflected quickly, her pitch rising. "We can figure out the administrative paperwork later." I ended the call without another word. She had not confessed to the fraud directly, but her hesitation and immediate pivot to my health told me everything I needed to know. She knew the payments were wrong. 10 minutes later, my tablet chimed with a new email notification. It was a forwarded message from Ryan. My youngest son had blindly passed along a group email he just received from Derek, likely out of sheer confusion. I opened the message and read my oldest son's words. Derek did not sound panicked in writing. He sounded exactly like a bank branch manager directing his subordinate employees. He wrote that my illness had made me paranoid and combative. He ordered his siblings to present a united front and strictly forbade them from discussing any finances with me directly until he got the paperwork cleaned up. A reply from Ryan sat at the top of the forwarded chain. It contained only 3 words. "What paperwork, Derek?" Colleen had not replied at all. Sitting back in my chair, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the last decade of my life. Since Elaine passed away, I had quietly paid for my children's emergency car repairs, property tax shortages, and high medical deductibles. I never kept a ledger. My wife always taught me not to use generosity as a weapon, so I just paid their bills and stayed silent. Looking at Derek's email, I finally understood my own massive mistake. My children had interpreted my endless silence as permanent permission. My willingness to constantly rescue them from their own choices had completely hidden their true character. Valerie broke the quiet atmosphere in the room. She pulled a final folder from her bag and opened an electronic audit summary. "We reviewed the digital footprint for the care logs," the investigator said, tracing a line down the page. "Every single monthly report was uploaded from the exact same user profile. They were usually submitted within minutes of midnight on the final reporting day. Different caregivers supposedly wrote those daily notes, yet the language and the submission pattern were completely identical. One person had orchestrated the entire reporting system." Valerie slid the audit report across the table. She pointed to a string of numbers logged next to the timestamp. It was an internet protocol address, pinpointing exactly where the device was located when the false records were uploaded to the insurance portal. The connection did not come from Derek's house. The audit trail showed that nearly every monthly report originated from the same home internet connection registered to Derek. A handful of later logins came from his work-issued laptop while he was traveling between branches, but the overwhelming majority of submissions traced back to his own residence, Valerie stated smoothly. A cold chill settled in the room. I looked at the name of the bank printed on the report. It was Derek's employer. My oldest son had used the exact workplace that trusted him with other people's money to manage the elaborate lie he built around his own father. Valerie Sloan placed a new stack of documents on the mahogany conference table, and the sharp rustle of paper cut through the quiet room. These were the monthly attestation forms required by the insurance carrier. Every single page ended with an electronic signature box, and Colleen had stamped her name on every single one. The investigator slid the top sheet toward my hands. According to the printed text, my daughter had certified that she personally supervised my daily medication, monitored my vital signs, and provided direct transportation. A hollow ache settled beneath my ribs. My middle child worked as a scheduling supervisor at a busy outpatient medical center. She spent 40 hours a week managing patient care logistics, so she understood exactly what those legal terms meant. She could never claim ignorance or administrative confusion. I picked up the second page, cross-checking the dates against the hospital timeline Nathan Cole had assembled. One specific form claimed she provided 8 hours of standby home assistance on a weekend in late autumn. The facility records sitting right next to it proved I never left the inpatient rehabilitation center that entire weekend. Another page listed transportation to a specialist clinic on a Tuesday morning, a day her own workplace schedule required her to manage the front desk for a 10-hour shift. The paper evidence was absolute, but looking at a printed signature was completely different from facing the person who signed it. Nathan opened his laptop and set up a secure video conference link. Marisol Vega pulled her chair into the corner of the room, remaining perfectly quiet and just outside the camera frame. I straightened my posture, smoothed the front of my flannel shirt, and waited for the connection to establish. Colleen appeared on the screen a moment later. She sat in her own kitchen, wearing her blue medical scrubs, and her eyes looked suspiciously red. Before anyone could formally start the meeting, the clinic supervisor launched into her practiced routine. She used that soft, soothing tone usually reserved for nervous patients, talking rapidly about my blood pressure and her deep concern for my recovery. I held up my hand, stopping the performance. I asked her a very simple question about the daily logs. Derek handled all those details, Colleen said, wiping a tear that never actually fell. He told us the signatures were just a routine insurance requirement to keep the file open. The excuse sounded perfectly rehearsed. I leaned closer to the laptop microphone and asked if she had bothered to read the sentence printed directly above her name. My daughter looked away from the camera lens, staring at something off-screen. She claimed she just trusted her older brother to handle the family business. "You trusted him," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low, "but you expected me to trust you." That single sentence shattered the fragile victim routine. Her posture stiffened, and the artificial tears vanished instantly. Dropping the concerned daughter act, she finally admitted knowing the money was being divided into 3 separate bank accounts. She called the payments a fair reimbursement for the emotional labor of dealing with an aging parent. She said Derek had convinced them to treat all their random phone calls and quick grocery errands as billable care hours. Then the real resentment leaked out. Her voice climbed higher, vibrating with years of hidden jealousy. She claimed I had always favored Ryan, always bailed him out of financial trouble in the past, and taking this insurance money was just a practical way to balance the family scales. She actually believed she was entitled to the cash because her younger brother had received more help a decade ago. Sitting in the quiet conference room, I looked at the familiar face on the monitor and remembered the week after my wife died. 6 years ago, standing in a rainy cemetery, I had specifically asked Colleen to be the one person who would tell me the truth if my mind or body ever started to fail. I had handed her the emotional authority over my health because I believed in her medical integrity. Derek used my insurance policy to steal money, I told the screen, making sure she heard every single syllable. "You used my trust." Colleen leaned forward, her expression hardening into a defensive mask. She warned me that pushing a fraud investigation would ruin the entire family over stupid paperwork. If the insurance company demanded repayment, she argued, Ryan would lose the apartment he needed to maintain custody of his son. She added that Derek might have to pull his daughter out of her private school. She was using my grandchildren as moral leverage. It was the oldest trick in their playbook, creating a massive crisis, and then making me responsible for preventing the consequences. I refused to play the game anymore. I reached across the table and picked up the legal document Nathan had prepared that morning. It was a formal revocation of her health information authorization, permanently stripping her of any right to view my medical records or speak to my doctors. The document officially named Marisol Vega as my sole care coordinator. I signed my name in thick blue ink, right where the webcam could capture the movement, and handed the paper to my attorney. An electronic notification chimed on Colleen's end of the call a moment later. Her eyes widened as she read the legal notice arriving in her email inbox. For the first time in her 40 years, My daughter realized she was no longer indispensable. I reached forward and terminated the video connection without saying goodbye. The laptop screen went black, leaving the conference room in heavy silence. Before I could even push my chair back from the table, Valerie turned her own computer monitor toward me. The investigator had just recovered a deleted email chain from 4 months ago, and the text proved my daughter knew exactly what she was doing. The message from Colleen to Derek asked a very specific question. Dad is doing almost everything himself now. Are we supposed to keep filing the same hours? Derek had replied 5 minutes later, sealing their guilt in black and white. As long as he does not ask, do not create a problem. A notification chimed on my tablet early Tuesday morning, breaking the quiet solitude of my new apartment. Nathan Cole had a locksmith install a motion-activated doorbell camera when he changed the locks at the old house, and the live video feed now showed my youngest son standing on the familiar concrete porch. Ryan wore a faded gray hooded sweatshirt, holding a brown paper grocery bag tightly against his chest. He reached for the brass doorknob, twisted it hard, and hit the heavy resistance of the new deadbolt. His shoulders immediately slumped. Pulling his cell phone from his pocket, he dialed a number and pressed the device against his ear. A minute later, my neighbor Loretta sent me a text message saying Ryan was asking where I went, and she told him to go home. Watching through the small screen, I saw Ryan set the groceries down on the welcome mat. He stood there for a long moment before turning around and walking back to his car. It was a bag of canned soup and crackers, arriving exactly 4 weeks too late. Seeing it sit there on the cold concrete did not feel like a victory. It just looked incredibly sad. 2 days after the porch visit, a thick envelope arrived at Willow Ridge via Nathan's courier service. Inside sat a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper. Ryan filled 3 pages explaining how Derek had convinced him the monthly bank transfers were simply gifts from my personal savings. He swore he never logged any care hours himself, and he blamed his older brother for managing all the paperwork. But halfway down the second page, the excuses stopped, and a harsh truth bled through the blue ink. Ryan admitted that he never called to thank me for the money because he was afraid asking questions would make the cash stop flowing. That single sentence revealed his exact level of complicity. Ambiguity was a shield he used to protect his own wallet, choosing ignorance because the truth carried a price tag he could not afford. Valerie Sloan confirmed the timeline during our next meeting. The insurance investigator brought copies of Ryan's bank records, highlighting the moment the transaction memos shifted. For the first 5 months, the notes attached to the deposits read, "Dad help." Then, during the 6th month, the label abruptly changed to family care distribution. Along with the bank records, Valerie produced a text message exchange pulled from the electronic audit. The day after that first new label appeared in his checking account, Ryan sent a message to his older brother. "Does Dad know this is from his policy?" Derek replied 3 minutes later, telling Ryan that I had signed everything and warning him not to make things dramatic. Ryan could have picked up the phone right then and called me to verify the story. Instead, my youngest boy replied with a thumbs-up icon, and he quietly accepted the very next bank transfer. He did not forge the original documents, but he swallowed the lie the moment it paid his rent. I told Nathan to arrange a 10-minute phone call. When the line connected that afternoon, Ryan started apologizing before I even said hello. His voice cracked over the speaker, rushing through a dozen frantic excuses about how he had no idea how much money Derek was actually taking from the carrier. I stopped him right in the middle of a sentence. "Why did you not call me the day you saw the words, family care distribution, on your bank statement?" The phone went dead silent. Only the faint sound of a television playing in the background filtered through the speaker. "I was scared," Ryan finally whispered. "I kept telling myself Derek understood the paperwork better than I did. Believing him was easier than calling you, because I was afraid I would discover I had to give every dollar back." A dull ache settled deep beneath my ribs, radiating outward. "That is the first honest thing any of you have said to me in weeks." He let out a shaky breath, clearly mistaking my acknowledgement of the truth for immediate forgiveness. He asked if he could drive over and see me, promising to explain everything in person. When I refused to give him my location at Willow Ridge, the tone of the conversation shifted in a heartbeat. "Are you cutting me out of the will?" Ryan asked. The sheer audacity of the question stole the breath right out of my lungs. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, grounding myself against the cool granite. I told him that asking about his inheritance during our very first honest conversation proved we were nowhere near ready for a real reconciliation. If he wanted to make things right, he could begin repaying the stolen insurance money through Nathan, without expecting a pat on the back in return. I hung up the phone before he could argue. Fear can be a powerful motivator. Terrified of Derek's control and desperate to prove he was cooperating with the investigation, Ryan forwarded a massive file to Nathan the following morning. It was a complete export of a private family group chat, dating back to the very beginning of the insurance claim. Scrolling through the blue and gray text bubbles on my tablet felt like wading through freezing water. Derek routinely instructed his brother and sister to report their available dates for the fake schedule. Colleen occasionally questioned the high number of hours, but Derek always insisted I would never actually log into the policy portal to check. Ryan's cooperation certainly helped establish the truth, but reading the casual way they discussed my life did not erase the fact that he kept taking his cut. Then, I found a specific message thread from 4 weeks ago. The exact week my respiratory infection peaked. The week my legs shook so badly, I could not safely walk across my own bedroom to reach a glass of water. Derek had sent a message to both of his siblings late on a Tuesday night. "Do not start doing extra now," my oldest son wrote. "If Dad's condition changes, the next assessment could lower what we can claim." The tablet slipped from my hands, landing on the carpet with a soft thud. My children did not just ignore my phone calls because they were selfish or busy. Derek had specifically ordered them to stay away, because stepping in to help me during a real medical emergency was the only thing that might expose their false reporting structure. Valerie Sloan returned to Willow Ridge on a rainy Thursday morning, carrying a single thin folder. The insurance investigator set her briefcase on the carpet and pulled out a blank recertification packet. The crisp pages smelled like fresh printer toner and legal consequences. She sat across from my small dining table, explaining that my recent hospital stay and my sudden change of address had triggered a mandatory review within their system. To keep the claim active, the carrier required my direct physical confirmation. The form asked if I still received care at home, who provided that care, and where I currently lived. Without my truthful signature, no further benefits would ever be paid. Derek could not legally sign the document for me because he only held administrative contact privileges. Forging my name now, especially during an active fraud review, would hand the insurance company a clear criminal violation. My oldest son was officially out of runway. The silence lasted exactly 2 days before Derek tried a different lock. Sitting in Nathan Cole's downtown office later that week, I listened to my attorney read an email that had just arrived. The message sounded incredibly reasonable, layered with corporate buzzwords and fake diplomacy. Derek proposed that I sign a temporary continuation of benefits, just so the family could sort out our past administrative errors privately. He promised to repay any disputed money later, framing the entire disaster as a simple misunderstanding. Nathan did not even ask for my opinion. The lawyer typed a one-sentence reply, stating clearly that Frank Delaney would never certify services he did not receive, and hit send. Rejection made my oldest son desperate. Later that afternoon, Ryan forwarded a new message from their sibling group chat. Derek had suggested that my severe respiratory infection might have impaired my cognitive judgment. The branch manager wanted to request a formal capacity evaluation, laying the groundwork to declare me legally incompetent. His strategy collapsed immediately. Colleen replied to the text thread, flatly refusing to sign any statement claiming I was confused. My daughter pointed out that she had just faced me on a video call, and my mind was dangerously sharp. Ryan sending the screenshot to Nathan gave us a perfect map of their next move, keeping us one step ahead. Since the medical angle failed, Derek tried the police. A uniformed officer contacted Nathan's office the following morning, following up on a welfare check requested at my old house. Derek had told the emergency dispatcher he feared I was wandering and lost. The officer never kicked down a single door. Nathan provided my signed statement, a letter from my new physician, and a call log proving I had explicitly requested privacy from my children. The officer closed the file within 10 minutes, leaving Derek with no address and no legal authority. His attempt to frame my independence as elder isolation only generated more official paperwork proving my complete mental competence. While my children panicked, my own life started to grow. I began attending morning physical therapy sessions at the Willow Ridge Wellness Center, pushing my lungs to heal. I ate my meals in the main dining room instead of hiding in my apartment. When the community director learned about my 30 years with the Columbus Fire Department, she asked me to join the Resident Safety Committee. Reviewing evacuation routes gave me a quiet sense of purpose, reminding me of the man I used to be before I became a fraudulent billing code. One afternoon, Marisol Vega sat across from me holding a cup of green tea. She smiled and pointed out that I had just eaten an entire lunch without checking my cell phone a single time. The old family system was shrinking, and a new community was slowly taking its place. But Derek was running out of options, so he reached for the ugliest tool he possessed. My phone lit up on a Tuesday evening with a voicemail from a number I recognized immediately. It belonged to my teenage granddaughter, Sophie. I pressed play, and her small, trembling voice filled my quiet living room. She said she missed me. She asked if she had done something wrong, and begged me to come to her upcoming school play. My chest physically ached listening to her cry. I knew her tears were entirely real, but I also recognized the absolute cruelty of her father. Derek had placed his own child right in the middle of a financial fraud investigation, using her heartbreak as a weapon to force my hand. I refused to let him win, but I also refused to abandon her. Buying a floral greeting card from the community gift shop, I sat down and wrote a long note. I told Sophie that I loved her very much, that the current silence was an adult problem, and that nothing happening was her fault. I placed the card in a blank envelope and had Nathan mail it from his downtown office. I protected my granddaughter, but I kept my location a complete secret. By the end of the third week, the pressure on Derek reached a boiling point. His private lawyer sent a threatening certified letter to Nathan, alleging that Willow Ridge and its staff were illegally isolating a vulnerable senior citizen. The document demanded immediate family access. Nathan did not flinch. My attorney responded with a heavy stack of defense material. He sent the independent medical assessment confirming my capacity, the signed revocation of Colleen's medical proxy, and the communication records proving I had initiated the boundaries myself. Derek's legal bluff crashed into a solid wall of evidence. I thought the silence might finally hold. Then, Nathan walked into my apartment on a Friday morning, carrying a thick manila folder and a very strange expression. He sat down on my small sofa, placing the folder on the coffee table. The lawyer told me that Derek, Colleen, and Ryan had formally requested an in-person meeting here at Willow Ridge. According to their joint email, they wanted to sit down in a neutral space and finally apologize for everything they had done. I stared at the folder, waiting for the catch. An apology from Derek felt about as likely as snow in July. Nathan opened the manila cover. Attached to their emotional request was the insurance recertification packet. Derek had already filled out every single page, checking the boxes to confirm daily home care, listing his own address, and smoothing over every discrepancy. The only thing left blank was the signature line at the very bottom. They were coming to apologize, but the apology required my ink. The private conference room at Willow Ridge smelled of fresh coffee and lemon furniture polish, but the air inside felt suffocatingly tight. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a pressed flannel shirt, with Nathan Cole seated quietly to my right. Marisol Vega took a chair in the corner near the window, keeping a watchful eye over the room. At the opposite end of the table, a laptop sat open with Valerie Sloan connected via a secure video feed, her microphone muted for the moment. When the heavy wooden door finally opened, my 3 children walked in together. Derek led the way, though his usual confident stride looked a little stiff, and his expensive suit jacket appeared slightly rumpled. Colleen followed closely behind him, clutching her leather purse like a shield, while Ryan dragged his feet at the rear, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. My oldest son pulled out a chair and sat directly across from me. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek, polished presentation folder. I recognized it immediately. It was the exact same dark blue folder he had brought to my house 10 months ago, the day he convinced me to sign the original insurance claim. "Dad," Derek began, folding his hands resting on top of the table. He used his calmest, most diplomatic tone, the one he probably used when denying a loan application at the credit union. "We all know this has been an incredibly stressful year. The family care benefit was always meant to support our entire family system, and you did receive help in many different forms. We just want to get this misunderstanding cleared up so we can focus on your recovery." He slid the open folder across the polished wood. Inside sat the printed recertification packet, fully completed in his neat handwriting, with only the signature line at the very bottom left completely blank. I did not reach for his pen, and I did not look at the blank line. Instead, I pulled my own thick manila folder from the seat beside me and placed it squarely next to his documents. "You told me you could not afford one day to care for me," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Explain why you were paid to care for me for 8 months. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy winter blanket. Colleen looked down at her lap, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. Ryan shifted his weight in his chair, staring at the floorboard trim. Derek cleared his throat, adjusting his posture. "It was just a logistical overlap, Dad. We were going to figure out the hours. Let us talk about the logistics, I interrupted, opening my manila folder. I did not want to deliver a speech. I just wanted answers to the paper trail sitting in front of me. I pulled out the first document and pushed it toward the center of the table. Why was my mailing address changed to your house the day after I signed the initial claim? Before Derek could formulate an excuse, I slid the hospital timeline next to it. Why do these caregiver logs show you providing standby assistance in my kitchen while I was physically admitted to the inpatient rehabilitation facility across town? Colleen let out a small, trembling breath, but I turned my attention directly to her. Pulling her signed attestations from the stack, I laid them flat. Why did you certify that you drove me to a specialist clinic on a Tuesday morning when your own employer schedule shows you managing the front desk for a 10-hour shift? Derek told us to count our phone calls, Colleen whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks as she instantly pointed the finger at her brother. He said the insurance company would never check. My oldest son shot her a furious glare, but I kept moving. I presented the electronic audit trail Valerie had provided, tapping my finger against the highlighted Internet Protocol address. Why do these audit records show that nearly every monthly report originated from your home internet connection, with only a handful of later submissions coming from your work-issued laptop while you were traveling between branches? You even submitted some of the later reports from your work-issued laptop while traveling between branches. You were willing to risk your employer just to keep the fraud going. Finally, I pulled out the printed text message exchange and looked at Ryan. And why did you accept another bank transfer the day after Derek told you not to make things dramatic? Ryan buried his face in his hands, letting out a muffled sob. He admitted he was just too afraid to know the truth. The polished bank manager facade finally cracked. Derek slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table, the sudden noise making both of his siblings jump. The quiet diplomacy vanished, replaced by sheer, terrifying panic. Because the automatic withdrawals are bouncing, Derek snapped, his voice rising in pitch. He leaned over the table, the desperation leaking out of every word. They had not come to apologize for leaving me alone. They came because the money stopped and their own financial houses were collapsing. The laptop speaker crackled to life, and Valerie Sloan unmuted her microphone. The insurance investigator looked directly into the webcam, her expression completely unreadable. The carrier already possesses the complete audit trail, Mr. Delaney, Valerie stated clearly, her voice echoing slightly in the conference room. Your father signing that form cannot erase the previous discrepancies. Signing a false recertification today would simply create a new fraudulent document for our file. Derek slumped back in his chair, all the air rushing out of his lungs. His last practical argument had just disintegrated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own pen. Taking a blank sheet of lined paper from Nathan, I wrote a single, clear sentence. I did not receive the reported family care services. I signed my name beneath the statement, dated it, and slid that piece of paper toward the laptop camera for Valerie to record. I am not destroying this family, I told my children, looking each of them in the eye. I am just refusing to continue the lie that already destroyed my trust. As Nathan gathered the evidence back into my manila folder, Valerie spoke up one more time. She asked Derek to remain available for a separate, recorded administrative interview regarding his portal access. My oldest son stood up, buttoning his rumpled suit jacket with shaking fingers. He glared at me across the table, his jaw locked tight. You have absolutely no idea what this is going to cost us. I know exactly what it cost me, I answered, never breaking eye contact. Nathan opened his leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, sealed envelopes. Standing up, the attorney handed one envelope to each of my children. They contained the formal legal notices concerning my newly revised estate plan and the strict communication boundaries that would govern the rest of our lives. Standing behind the decorative pillar in the lobby, I watched Derek's breath fog the cold glass. The man who had carefully controlled my life for nearly a year now waited outside a locked door, shivering slightly in the damp winter air. Marisol Vega stepped up beside me, her voice quiet as she asked if I wanted the front desk security guard to escort him off the property. I shook my head, deciding that true closure required opening the door just a fraction. Inviting him upstairs to my private apartment was out of the question. We met in a public sitting area near the community library, with Nathan Cole notified via text message and a strict 15-minute time limit established. My oldest son sat across from me in a floral armchair that completely swallowed his defeated posture. Without his tailored suit jacket and his polished presentation folders, he looked incredibly small. Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He told me he had lost his management job, his suburban house, and his marriage all in the span of 2 short months. Staring at me with bloodshot eyes, the former bank manager claimed I had finally gotten exactly what I wanted. "I did not want any of this," I answered, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I just wanted a ride to the doctor. Everything that happened after that came directly from the records you chose to create." Rubbing his bare ring finger, my son looked down at the carpet. He asked me to call the state insurance investigators and tell them the whole family simply misunderstood the CARE program. He wanted me to lie, offering to turn documented falsehoods into a convenient administrative mistake just to save his own skin. Refusing his request felt incredibly simple, and I told him my signature would never cover his tracks again. "You want forgiveness, Derek," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But real remorse begins when you can describe the harm you caused without mentioning what it cost you first. Until you can do that, you will only contact me through Nathan." My oldest child stood up, his jaw tightening until the muscle jumped beneath his skin. He looked down at me and asked if I still considered him my son. The question carried the heavy weight of 43 years. "You are my son," I told him. "That is exactly why the truth hurt enough to completely change my life. But being my son does not make you the owner of it." He turned and walked out the front glass doors, disappearing into the cold Ohio rain. The silence lasted exactly 3 weeks before the facility mailroom delivered something unexpected. A thick envelope arrived from Colleen. My daughter did not fill the pages with frantic excuses or defensive medical jargon. Her handwritten letter focused entirely on the devastating loss of my trust, rather than the loss of her supervisory role at the clinic. For the very first time, she explicitly admitted she knew the reported care hours were impossible, confessing that she chose the extra money over asking me the truth directly. Her words required 2 slow readings at my small dining table. I did not pick up the phone to call her, but folding the pages carefully, I placed them safely inside Elaine's old wooden recipe box. Keeping the letter left a tiny fraction of room for future healing, without handing out cheap, unearned forgiveness right away. 6 months passed, and the heavy winter snow slowly melted into a bright, warm spring. After making consistent, quiet deposits into the attorney escrow account, Ryan earned a short, supervised visit. We met in the Willow Ridge Community Lounge on a Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by the smell of blooming hydrangeas from the open courtyard windows. My youngest boy brought absolutely no legal paperwork, asked for no financial favors, and made no grand, weeping speeches. We simply walked around the outdoor garden pathways together. He asked about my physical therapy progress, and he actually listened to the answer. I did not restore his lost inheritance, nor did I grant him access to my bank accounts, but the reward for his honesty was a genuine relationship. We were finally building something real, one quiet afternoon at a time. As my lungs fully recovered, my daily routine expanded far beyond the walls of my apartment. Remembering the terrifying week when none of my children would drive me to the clinic, I helped organize a volunteer ride network for the residents here. I funded the first year modestly using my own savings, recruiting retired teachers and former engineers as dispatch coordinators. Armed with a clipboard and a dedicated phone line, we made sure no senior citizen in our community ever missed a medical appointment because they felt entirely alone. The project converted my deepest pain into actual social value, grounding me in a family I had chosen for myself. On the 3rd Sunday in June, the front desk delivered a stack of Father's Day cards. I received messages from all 3 of my children, along with 2 short video clips from my grandchildren. Sitting on my balcony in the warm summer breeze, I answered my grandchildren directly through the secure electronic channels Nathan had approved. I sent Ryan a brief text message thanking him for his card, and I mailed Colleen a short note acknowledging I had received her letter. I sent Derek absolutely nothing beyond my attorney's standing instructions. Later that evening, the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I stepped back inside and pushed the heavy brass deadbolt on my front door until it clicked solidly into place. Turning that lock was no longer about fear, and it was certainly not about hiding from the world. It was undeniable proof that I finally decided who was allowed to cross my threshold. Love does not require a parent to pretend a massive betrayal never happened. Help given freely is love, but help recorded and billed while a father suffers alone is just exploitation. A parent can forgive their children internally without ever restoring the blind access that made their harm possible in the first place. I did not lock my children out because I stopped loving them. I locked them out because they had mistaken my love for permanent permission. For the very first time since Elaine passed away, The key resting in my hand belonged only to me. You spend your entire life building a reliable safety net for your family, weaving every thread out of your own quiet sacrifices. You skip vacations and write heavy checks you can barely afford, believing that being a good parent means standing between your children and the harsh realities of the world. You excuse their constant requests for money as temporary setbacks. You ignore the nagging feeling that your generosity is slowly turning into a permanent expectation. When you are the one always providing the shelter, it is easy to confuse their endless dependence with genuine love. But true affection does not vanish the absolute moment your wallet snaps shut. The hardest truth to accept about financial exploitation in your later years is that it almost never arrives wearing the terrifying face of a stranger. It does not look like a thief breaking through your window in the middle of the night. Instead, it looks like a familiar car parked in your driveway. It sounds exactly like someone you raised, telling you that they are just trying to help. The abuse hides behind corporate forms, electronic signatures, and the heavy guilt trip of mandatory family loyalty. When your adult children start viewing your life savings as their early inheritance, they stop seeing you as a human being who needs care. You simply become a resource to be managed, and your physical decline becomes nothing more than an inconvenient disruption to their cash flow. Walking away from that destructive dynamic often feels like failing, but drawing a firm boundary is actually the most powerful act of self-preservation you can make. You do not have to negotiate with people who actively profit from your pain. You certainly do not owe anyone an apology for securing your medical files or changing the locks on your own front door. Taking back control of your financial accounts takes immense courage. Society routinely pressures older parents to silently endure disrespect just to keep everyone smiling at the holiday dinner table. Yet, a family held together entirely by your ongoing suffering is not a real family at all. Protecting your peace does not mean you have to stop loving the children you brought into this world. It simply means you finally understand the critical difference between offering your unconditional love and offering unrestricted access to your life. You can forgive their failures in your own heart without ever handing them the power to ruin you a second time. True closure does not always require a tearful reunion or a dramatic apology. Sometimes, real closure simply looks like a quiet apartment, a new set of brass keys, and the profound relief of knowing you will never be used again. Have you ever found yourself in a position where the people who were supposed to protect you ended up being the ones you needed protection from? Making the agonizing choice to walk away from your own flesh and blood goes against every natural parenting instinct, but sometimes it remains the only way to survive their greed. How did you finally find the incredible strength to draw the line? And what did it ultimately cost you to lock that door for good? Share your own experiences below, because speaking the honest truth about family betrayal is the only way we remind each other that nobody has to suffer in silence.